you. So, more joy. How have you liked our theme for the start of this 2018 on Philippians? Have you enjoyed going through the book and kind of really getting to know it well? Ralph, you don't like it? You haven't liked it too much? I didn't see your hand raising there. All right, he's all right. Okay, he's good. Has anybody been tempted to move on to Ephesians or Galatians or any of the other Pauline books? Because while you're in the area, you might as well breeze through some of those and see the repeat of themes and the different themes. Paul writes very specifically in most of his letters to situations, many of them in crisis. In Philippians, it was a little more of a positive encounter and feelings about them. So that's why for him this letter is a joy to write and it's a joy to read, but the other letters are good too. And I do want to draw your attention to the fact that there is going to be a pretty major Paul movie coming out here. The man who played Jesus in The Last Temptation of Christ is in it. So it's going to be a pretty big deal. I've been seeing it advertised, and what a great way to follow up on this is to check out that film that's coming up, Paul the Apostle. Also want to remind you that you as a member, you have benefits to being members. Did you know that? All sorts of things. You have eternal life insurance provided here, and Right Now Media is a great resource. If you are not receiving, if you don't have the link for that, you can just email me. It's the Netflix for Christians. So if you're looking for more on Philippians or other videos on other topics, and you just feel like watching those instead of Netflix sometime, please send me and I'll get you the link and get you connected to Right Now Media. A lot of good studies that are on Philippians. And of course, we're using the last words of Christ, "It is finished," from Right Now Media for our Tuesday and Wednesday Lent studies. Anyway, so something to think about is the topic today. And it came to my mind this week as there was a summit with the president and those who were involved in the video gaming industry this week. I don't know if you heard about it. It wasn't a long one, but it was one I think kind of pulled together in light of the fact that once again we had a shooter in a school who appears to have been more than a little bit obsessed with violent video games. We talked about this for many years since they came out. It's a long topic. I know that it goes past video games into things like should boys and girls play with play guns. I can remember my family's not allowing me to have anything more than a squirt gun, and it drove me crazy. So I turned my hockey stick into a machine gun. Boys will be boys. Maybe some girls are interested in that as well. There's been thoughts about, I remember playing with G.I. Joes. Here I am playing with G.I. Joes happily in the basement with my friend, blowing things up, and Vietnam's going on at the same time. And I remember my mom saying it just made her uneasy. So we've been dealing with this issue. What's the influence of certain activities on kids for a long time? But video games, have you dared to look at any of the scenes from some of these video games that are out? Apparently, the president showed a 1-minute clip. I think this is right because I was following the article, and they put together a 1-minute clip. I don't know if it was the same one that he had used or if it was one that was put together by these writers. And I could not watch more than 30 seconds of it. And I mean, I've watched all the war movies, and I've seen my share of bad circumstances in life. I could not watch more than 30 seconds of a 1-minute clip. I finally had to stop when I saw an axe wielder chasing a screaming woman. I'm thinking, this is a video game. This is what people are playing now. And not just people, but kids. Active shooter games are the number one game. It's not race cars, friend, or some easy, fun, blow-up planets kind of game. These are people controlling weapons, chasing humans. I could even give a pass a little bit maybe for the zombies, but even so, these are people playing games, killing other people. And the question is this a big deal? Does this matter? Is this a freedom of choice for people to do things that are legal that they want to do? Well, I would argue possibly for adults, this might be a legitimate pastime if that's what they care for. I don't care for hunting. I'm not against it, but I don't want to do it. But I understand it's legal. That's great. It's not a bad thing at all. So, however, it's the teenagers that I worry about. And there's been some studies here, and this is an interesting one. Indiana University gathered together, and it's a small study, but 28 students. These are students that had not been video gamers. They had not played these kind of games much. They were hard to find, I'm sure. But there's some people not interested. And they let them play the video game, first-person shooter. That's where you've got a gun and you're shooting people. And they asked them to play those video games every day for a week, for a few hours a day. Now, they tested them before, and then they tested them after. What they tested them for was their sensitivity and reaction to various things that most of us would be sensitive to on a level or not. So, did a certain story make them sad? Did a certain face, were they able to recognize in the face that somebody was scared? Okay, so they did this test. It's really basically to see if you're aware of other people and their emotions and the effect of emotions on them. They did that test before, and then they did the game for a week, and then they tested them after with another variation. And they found that almost all of the students became less sensitive to others after a week of gaming. They literally were able to note that they have an increase in aggressive behavior in the way that they answer to these responses. And they determined this isn't just an emotional experience. This is a neurological experience. In other words, their brain changed a little. Their brain changed a little. Of course, our brain changes all the time. Our brain is constantly changing. Those of us who are starting to forget things know our brain is changing, But for teenagers whose brains are very much in the growing phase, the more time with these games, the more the brain becomes desensitized to the suffering and circumstances of others. It's not just a game. We're actually playing games with brains. Okay? These are scary things. Now, you can't always draw a direct correlation. You can't always say, well, if you play a game, you will kill somebody. That's, of course, not the case. And imagine there's people who've done that who've never played a game in their life. So this isn't a direct correlation, but what we do realize is that there is a generation of people playing extremely violent, so violent that you would not want to sit through a few seconds of it, games, sometimes for 2, 3, 4 hours, sometimes all day. It has to have an effect, don't you agree? Some kind of effect. Now, the next thing is that we're not content just to have our teenagers gaming and spending a lot of time facing the screen. Now, the new phenomenon is how soon can we put a tablet or a phone into our child's hand? How many of you have now seen a baby playing with a cell phone and actually knowing what they are doing with the game? It's all over. Parents now have decided that, some parents have decided, that pacifiers are passé. If your child is fretting, give them your cell phone and let them play a game. And these kids can, before they even talk, they can actually interact with the phone. Is this harmful? They're certainly not playing those games. I don't think there's a parent in the world that would hand a first-person shooter game to their toddler. I hope. Although I have seen them bring them to movies that are violent. You may have seen that as well. Get a babysitter, right? Unfortunately, friends, this is unbelievable. U.S. Department of Health and Human Services estimates that American children spend a whopping, anyone want to take a guess how many hours? Anybody for 1, 2, 3, 4? 7 hours in front of screens. 7 hours. It's phone, tablet, television, computer. 7 hours. 7 hours. That is the estimate of the average child. I don't know the child that's above average on that. Can you imagine? Kids as young as 2 play iPad games and have playroom toys that involve touch screens. What's wrong with this? Hey, they've got to get ready for the future, right? In some ways, I defend some of it because, hey, listen, they're going into a future where all of this technology isn't just gadgets, it's real life. You're seeing it now. They're being handed these things to work. They got to work them in their first entry-level minimum wage job. They've got to run computers. Take your order at McDonald's. So they're going to have to know how to use all these things. The concern is how many hours the young minds are being exposed to this. And what they're finding is that the more time that children come involved in this early on, the more narrow their ability to respond to larger circumstances becomes. So basically what happens is they get really good at this, but they're not too good when they move out into the real world where there are people and these weird things called trees, and you don't climb those things, you just look at them, and grass, you don't run around on it, you just look at it apparently. They're having a harder time developing the ability to interact with a larger world. Now, kids didn't have these things. They have no choice, right? They're always interacting with a larger world. And so their brain becomes very good at interacting with the larger world as it's trained. But with an iPad, this becomes the world. Two-dimensional. And it's incredibly stimulating. Because in the real world, the tree just sort of stands there. But here, there's always something going on. Always something happening. So kids become very ADD. Something has to happen all the time because that's what I am used to. The idea of kicking back, staring up at the clouds go by, something probably all of us did when we were kids, doesn't happen. The other thing is they don't become very good at initiating because who initiates in this relationship? This initiates. This is the one that's making things happen. Who remembers getting together with some friends and playing a game that you devised together? Who remembers getting together? Going outside of the house and saying, what do you guys want to play? Man, I can remember playing statues. Remember statues? Holy cow, what a dumb game. What a dumb game. You had to imagine you were some kind of statue. I don't remember how it even works. We did that for hours with each other. And we could be different things and do anyway. All right, I'm sounding like an old man, right? The other thing that maybe hits us more home is news and noise. I am totally guilty of this, as my wife will tell you. I have to have the news on. I have to have the radio on. I want to look at my phone. First thing I do when I wake up in the morning is I check all of my news apps. So I'm praying about this because I don't know that this is making me a better person. You know? I don't know that this is making me a calmer person. I don't know if I'm getting more good information as a result, because one of the things I do notice is they only have so much to talk about, so they just keep talking about it over and over and over again. There's so much news and noise coming at us that I wonder what that does to our spirit. I wonder what that does to our brain, to our soul. There was a security guard at the hospital, and he had on this very angry talk show on the radio. Playing. I'm standing there waiting to get my ID card checked. I'm thinking, how much do I want a security guard to be spending this whole day with people yelling at each other, right, on the radio? Is that the kind of guy that will have a calm response to a problem? Or is this the guy that grabs his gun right away because his whole life is hypersensitized? So anyways, where do I get all this? Well, Paul says, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, pure, lovely, admirable, excellent, praiseworthy, think about these things. We only have so much capacity every day for our brain, only so much. If it's filled with violent video games, how much room is there for noble and true and praiseworthy things to work their way in? If it's 7 hours in front of a screen, how much time is left for admirable things, excellent things, praiseworthy things? If the news is on constantly and we're constantly putting ourselves into a feeling of anxiety and confusion and frustration, how much emotional capacity do we have left to attend to God's things? I would argue that the world is crowding out these things, and one could even get into conspiracy theories. Why not? Everyone has one, right? That the devil isn't a little bit behind all this, huh? Giving us a lot of stuff to push out any possibility of us soaking in the grace of God, the wisdom that God has to offer, the knowledge that God has to give, the word that wants to work its way into our hearts and our minds. Paul was well aware. He was talking to people, a small group of Christians, in the middle of an extremely significant Roman culture of Philippi. It was as Roman as you can get, because when it was taken over from the Greeks, Roman soldiers, part of the battle, were given the land, and it was a Roman-ruled, Roman culture town. And here these Christians, they're getting bombarded all day long by the Roman culture, Roman gods, Roman ways. And we've talked somewhat before about Roman ways, but what I can tell you is Roman ways neatly match up with first-person shooter games. It was a violent, corrupt, mean-spirited culture. It was essentially a culture developed by soldiers. And here are these Philippians. Paul's saying, look, I know what you're hearing all day long. I know what you're seeing all day long. I know what you're surrounded by all day long. But brothers and sisters, don't let it hurt your church. Don't let it hurt your soul. Just the verse before I read, it says, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. Many pastors end their sermons with that, I remember over the years. Guard your hearts. God wants to guard our hearts, our minds, our eyes. How many of you remember the song, Be careful, little child, what you see? Be careful, little child, what you see? For the Father above, looking down in love, be careful, little child, what you see. It actually sounds very ominous, doesn't it? The Father above is looking down, but he's looking down in love. He doesn't want little eyes to see things little eyes don't need to see, little ears to hear things little ears don't need to hear, little hearts to experience things that little hearts don't have to experience. And he's looking down at us because we're the little children. We're the ones that he wants to guard our hearts. Now, how far away is guarding our hearts from pushing away from all of culture and no longer engaging in culture? This has been a battle since Christ came. Some decided the only way to escape the culture was to run out to the desert, to run off to a monastery. Some even climbed up pillars and sat on pillars. You know about those people? Get away from the culture completely. The only problem with that is, how do you reach a culture that you abandon? How do you help other people find the way if you've said adios? You don't. Jesus said we have to be in this world, but not of it. And that's our challenge. There are video games, and you and I will not be able to stop that. Parents are going to give their kids screens, and that's not going to be something that we can stop except when they come to my house. And the news is not going to stop churning, and the talk shows aren't going to stop yelling, and we're not going to be able to avoid it. We walk through it. In the 112 hours we have a week, we've got 1, maybe 2, maybe 3, where we're all together. And your ears and your eyes hear what's good for your soul. The rest of it's up to you. How are you going to manage it? Now, I'd like to offer some suggestions because I think this is one of those things that's actually very practical and not really complicated. First is I think we need to listen to good music. Amen? How many people here felt an incredible peace come over them when Dave started playing Amazing Grace this morning? How many? I mean, I quick grabbed my phone out and I started recording it. I didn't get it all the way through. It was, you just feel it. You just feel it. And I've been blessed because I've already been at our praise band rehearsal this morning and we've gone through our songs this morning. And so I just feel it when you're around good music. Now, I like all kinds of music. I remember my dad plunking out hymns on the piano, and later on we had the old family pump organ, and his feet would push down, and he would play that. I remember singing in a church choir since I could sing. But at the same time, I sang in the community choir, which sang secular songs as well. I grew up with Peter, Paul, and Mary. They weren't neighbors. They were musicians. And remember Puff the Magic Dragon, the Beach Boys, and I'm a huge fan of Neil Diamond, thanks to my mom, who had an 8-track of Neil Diamond that she would play while she was ironing over and over and over again. Same album. As I grew up, I also noticed that in my parents' record cabinet was Jesus Christ Superstar and Godspell. I put those and heard them. And later on, I was blessed to be able to be in both of those musicals. I grew up in Detroit, so we had Motown, Bob Seger, Ted Nugent. Can't win them all. But I went off to summer camp every summer, and all summer long, I'd grab the guitar and join in playing Christian songs all summer long. Off to college, and I fell along with a lot of people for U2. And you all know my affinity for Bruce Springsteen. But I also came across, through a music appreciation class, the Brandenburg Concerto and Mass in B minor by Bach. And I had those albums as well. We sang spirituals, drinking songs, and anthems in the men's chorus. I got to know the blues when I went to Chicago, but at the same time, I introduced my church to the Chicago Folk Service, which, if you've ever heard, is one of the earliest guitar masses. Found Christian music, popular, modern Christian music. Began to introduce that music into the churches that I was a part of. At the same time, found a love for jazz. The point basically is that in the soundtrack of my life, I've been very blessed. I've been exposed to all kinds of music. And as a result, I like all kinds of music. And I have a lot of Christian music in my soundtrack. It's not all Christian music. Should we only listen to Christian music? I don't think that's necessary. I think there are people who are legitimately sharing their insights into the world, celebrating wonderful things like love in the world. I don't think a diet only of Christian music is necessary. But what I have to ask you is, do you have any in your diet when you leave this church? Do any of you have a Christian station on your radio? Do you purchase or seek out on iTunes or other things the Amazing Graces that you could listen to? It's so easy if you have Spotify, Pandora, Sirius, Amazon Prime. There are Christian stations that you could have in the background of your day. Some with words, and some Christian music is instrumental. Bach always wrote at the top of his pieces, Solo Deo Gloria, to the glory of God. So I believe when you listen to Bach, it is a spiritual experience. Listen to good music. Okay? I don't mean you can't listen to other music. I think it's important for Christians to stay engaged. I'm not one of those Christians who would say, take all of your Katy Perry albums and, toss them in the recycling bin. Although it's interesting to note that Katy Perry started out as a Christian singer, but made a lot more money becoming a non-Christian singer. She's a pastor's daughter, by the way. Do you have a steady diet of good Christian music in your life? Good music. So that you're bringing that in. How about the silver screen? Do you seek out good movies, good television shows? Do you specifically filter for yourself, how much time am I watching garbage, silliness, nonsense, or even worse, versus how much time am I making sure to bring in good culture? And there's plenty of good Christian movies, or movies with themes that certainly match up with our Christian worldview. I was looking at the Oscar Award nominees. The Shape of Water, which won, it's a theme of two worlds being brought together with love, as really Call Me By Your Name was too in another way. In The Darkest Hour and in Dunkirk, we see courage and determination, two very positive views that match up well with our Christian worldview. I have nothing to say about Get Out. It's just a horror movie, but it was very popular. Lady Bird, an opportunity to watch a young girl struggle with a relationship with her mother. The Phantom Thread, I can't say much about that either. The main thing is that the woman tries to poison her husband multiple times. And we've seen that one, I don't know. It's interesting. I haven't seen it, but that's what I hear. The Post talks about a time of truth seeking. 3 Billboards, seeking of justice. There's good themes in these. But you have to be a Christian looking for them, a Christian seeking them. That's all non-Christian films. They're valuable. They're good in a sense. But I just hope that more people will go out and see The Wrinkle in Time. And not just kids. Madeleine L'Engle was a Christian author who found remarkable ways to bridge contemporary and secular culture using her imagination, using fantasy writing. And in this particular movie, which has just come out this weekend, a young girl is seeking her father. And the values, the understanding in this movie will feed your soul. And it's a great one for you to bring a child to, whose last great experience of the movies was the Lego movie. Bring your children, your grandchildren. I can never, ever be thankful enough to my godmother, Shirley Andrus. My godmother is the one that gave me, I've told you this before, it's so powerful for me. She gave me the Chronicles of Narnia as a present. If you haven't read the Chronicles of Narnia for yourself, read them to a kid, to a grandkid. Those captured my imagination. written by C.S. Lewis, one of the greatest Christian apologists of our day. And I think they changed my life. See, the power of good movies and good books. The Hunger Games. Okay, the Hunger Games shows us the absolute worst impulses of our society. Where our society could go if we totally become unmoored from any values. But The Wrinkle in Time shows us what could happen if we don't. If we stay rooted in our faith tradition, and if we use the understandings we have that God has given us of this world, what a difference that could make. I'm not ready to ban books. I think that's a terrible idea. But can we help provide filters for our kids, our grandkids? Can we encourage good movies and good books to be a part of our own diet? And have good conversations. I tell you, the smartphone has been a great blessing in so many ways. I just count it so fortunate to be in a time where we have access to information and communication in ways that have never been experienced before. And I think there's no way that we can go back. We're never going to go back. So there's just simply no point in talking about that. The question is, how are we going to go forward? How are we going to make sure that this is a tool in our life and not something that controls our life? Just for fun last night, I wondered what it would be like to have a conversation with Alexa. And I should have recorded it because it was a lot of fun. Alexa has a chat app now. Did you know that? And you can say, Alexa, let's chat. So you guys all go home and try it if you don't. Otherwise, get a dot, for goodness sakes, catch up with the world. Have one, even if you don't use it much. Turn it off, unplug it if you're worried about CIA listening to it. But anyway, you need to know what people are doing. And I had a chat with Alexa last night, and it was fascinating. It was at a point, you forget you're talking to an algorithm. All right? It's just an algorithm. It's just a complex series of mathematical things. It takes a word you say, and it searches its database for something to say about it. But I'll tell you what, I will bet you in a few years, lonely people will be talking to Alexa. I'm serious. Regularly. And I don't know if that's all bad, but what I wonder is, are we losing the art of a good conversation with a real person? We're texting, we're posting, we're emailing. Have you sat down lately with a cup of coffee each in your hands and said, what do you want to talk about? Or catch me up on your life? Now some of you say, absolutely, that's the only way I do it. You've looked around though and seen, right? How many of you have gone to a restaurant and seen 4 people around the table all looking at their phones? Do you know that sometimes they text each other? I am not kidding. They are texting each other. I've seen kids in our youth group, and J-Mac can attest to this, who will text someone next to them. But a good conversation, it's an art, right? The reason we've been able to get so polarized as a country is that we don't know how to talk to each other anymore. I used to be able to go around and talk to anybody about my views about one thing or another, and they would say, Andy, you're full of it, but let me tell you my side. Now, do you know I watch every word? I am careful for every single buzzword. You say, you're not careful enough, Andy, because sometimes when you're preaching, you make me mad. I say, I'm trying. But you realize the minefield the eggshells we're all walking on. And that's because we've lost the art of conversation where we could literally completely disagree, but learn from each other. Understand each other better. And guess what? Actually come to a solution together? Is that really possible? Yeah, it is. That's America. We don't want to lose that. So Paul says, Whatever's pure, noble, admirable, excellent, aim at those things because life is short, you don't have much time, and you only have so much bandwidth. Make sure you don't clutter it up with a whole bunch of junk, especially junk that will drag you down. Jesus was more extreme. He says, if your eye causes you to stumble, pluck it out. I'm not recommending that. Just turn off the phone. But in Proverbs, we hear these words, and I think they're good words for us. Keep your heart with all vigilance, for from it flow the spring of life. Put away your crooked speech and put devious talk far from you. Let your eyes look directly forward and your gaze be straight before you. If we choose to, we can determine, we can be our own filter so that more of God's good blessings around us affect our hearts and our minds and our spirits. And then, what will come out of us? Amen.